Hey, everybody. I know it's been a while since I've sat down in front of you guys. Had a lot going on the last couple months, moving to and from back to school, starting school, dealing with school. So it's been a little bit of a lot. My producer, Trey, who y'all know very well, he lives in Hattiesburg. I've since moved up to Oxford, so he is unable to kind of assist me right now, but thanks to my friend Leighton behind the camera, we're getting it going back. Want to thank everybody for being patient with me. I know I've been getting a lot of responses from people saying, where's the podcast and all that, but I'm back. I'm going to try to get these out, once a week like I usually do. Sports segments as well. I'm going to try and get those. So, yeah, we're back, and I'm excited to get back to doing this. But today, my guest, who I've actually been in contact with for a while, been trying to meet with him for a while, so we're finally here. He's a best-selling author of a couple books you guys may have known, Dear William, How Toyota Became Number One, John Deere. That's John Deere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome, Mr. David Magee.
Thank you. I like that applause.
It's the best clap that I could do. How are you, Mr. Magee? Thank you for letting us use your space and for coming on the show.
I'm so excited. I appreciate what you do so much, and I was so excited when we first met and to stay in touch with you. And, hey, I'm honored that when you're swinging back into action, you called me.
Yeah, exactly. But so how I wanted to kind of start this is, so you just had a new book come out.
Yes.
It's called Things Have Changed. So I kind of wanted, I'm starting to become more of an avid reader.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to read a few things. So, for someone who doesn't know who you are and doesn't know about, the kind of books and stuff that you've written, why don't you kind of tell me kind of what this new book is about?
Yeah. So I really never thought I would write a guidebook for parents on how they can help their children and students, teens and college students with mental health and substance misuse. I mean, it's the last thing I ever thought I would do. But that's the thing about this life, it'll surprise you. Mm-hmm. So back in the day, I had this life. I mean, I wrote a book. I spent a lot of time with Jerry Jones, owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and kind of did this thing with a owner of this pro football team and how he, took this franchise and changed the NFL's business model and turned this into such a profitable business. He doesn't exactly win as many Super Bowls as he'd like, and he is a little bit of a narcissist and a nut, but it was an interesting book. And I wrote one, as you said, on John Deere. I did something on Phil Mickelson. But I never was really called to those books, and I did it because that's what I thought I should do. And I then got hit hard by life and battled my own journey of addiction, lost a son to an accidental overdose, a daughter battling an eating disorder, another son nearly died in college at a fraternity house, was in a coma for a couple of days. And besides our son we lost, I got my life back together, and our family got back together. And in that, I realized, see, that's what happens in a calling. I thought I was going to be a writer, but I didn't really know what I was supposed to write. So my book, Dear William, a memoir about our family's story, and then Things Have Changed, this guidebook that just came out, it's really about me finding my purpose. And I graduated from Ole Miss Journalism School and thought I was going down one path. Like a lot of people, I was an assistant sports editor. I thought I'd be a sports columnist or something, Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, here I am writing books to try to help college students and teens navigate this crazy world of mental health. And that's really what it's about. It's trying to help people make sense and find their way through this kind of crazy environment.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about that, because when I started doing this show about 2 years ago, and I went through a period when I had my own kind of mental health problem.
Mm-hmm.
Not problems, but everyone's got their own things that they
Sure.
go through. So I was having, I had bad anxiety and depression, all that, like most kids my age go through. And at that time, when you're going through something like that, you kind of feel like that you're the only one that's going through that sort of thing.
Right.
And, whenever I hear people that are going through stuff like that, my first thing I always say is, well, are you talking to somebody about it? And some people say no, some people say yes. And people that say no, I feel like the hardest part is just kind of admitting it. Almost like, you're familiar with my father. He's a recovering alcoholic just as well. So I had him on the show a couple years ago, and I asked him, kind of when you realized that you were going through this, what was it like to kind of admit it? Because a lot of people nowadays, it's hard to express these kind of emotions that, like, hey, I'm feeling down, or I don't really want to get out of bed today, or something like that. And that's the hardest part, is just kind of getting up and just admitting that you're going through this. Because a lot of people, including myself, were kind of afraid of the backlash, or not really backlash, but like people coming at you and saying, like, oh, he's just doing this for attention, or, maybe this is not true at all. So,
yeah, you're afraid they'll think less of you.
Right.
They'll judge you. Why are you doing that?
Right, exactly. Is that like a question? I was
No, yeah. I mean, that's what they'll think.
Yeah.
Your father, I mean, that had to have been special to do that, because there is something about the parent-child role model and whatnot, and we parents sometimes fail in that role. We want to be. I certainly failed at it at times. But to come full circle, that your father, that you have the care and interest to invite him into that conversation, and the fact that he was willing to do it, that's actually very touching to me, to be honest.
He's he's very open about it now. I mean, obviously I was real young. I was probably around 10, 11 years old, right around the time my parents got separated. And then when my dad was going off to rehab and all that stuff, I was a little young. So obviously kind of understanding all of that was the most difficult part.
Right.
There was a time where my dad called me in. My dad called me and my brother into the kitchen with my mom, and he just kind of told us, he's like, I'm not going to be living here anymore, and I'm not going to be around here anymore. And as a kid, the first case scenario is that the kid thinks that it's their fault.
Right.
They're like, what did I do? What did I do wrong? So immediately, as a young kid, that's how I was. I was like, what did I do? And then I look at Sam and I was like, what, is there something that we did that we could have to prevent this? And that's kind of just a battle that it really took me a long time to articulate and kind of understand. But now, and I think when I was younger, the way that I felt about my father was a lot differently than how I feel about him now. I love my father. He's he's probably one of my role models. I look up to him. I mean, the stuff that he's told me, he's been through the ringer just like you. So, and I really admire people like that.
But that openness is what has deepened your relationship, right? Back in the time when he's going through that, you can't help but almost be mad at them. My children barely spoke. People tell me all the time now, I can't believe the relationship you have, like with your son Hudson, who my surviving son from the accidental overdose, who's now 10, 11 years sober, and my daughter who battled eating disorder and is in recovery, and they have children of their own now. People say, I can't believe, I'm so jealous of this relationship you have with your children. I'm like, hello. When I was at my worst, they didn't want to speak to me and really didn't. So I understand, like what you're saying, your father's openness really gave blossom to this relationship in the years since. But when he was going through the struggle, you're sitting there both feeling like, what did I do wrong? And A, I'm mad at you. Right. B, I'm mad at you.
And I think kind of when you talk about being mad at him, and when I was, I guess probably like 7th or 8th grade, kind of these young kids go through like a rebellious phase, and they're, don't want to listen to what their parents say. I did kind of go through a little bit something like that, and the way my father would speak to me back then, just because I didn't really, care about a whole lot. I really only cared about, my friends,
Right.
my social life. I didn't really care about the things that were actually important, like, school and mental and physical health,
Right.
because I think physical health can kind of coincide with mental health.
Yes.
Because strong body's a strong mind. It's a good quote that I've heard from a lot of people. But with me, there was a time in my life where I weighed 350 pounds. I was about two and a half years ago.
Yeah.
I weighed, probably 2 years. I weighed 350 pounds, and it was my lowest point, and I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
And that's what's so crazy about mental health too, is that you can be at your lowest point and not even know about it.
That's the magical insight of the day. And you see that in people struggling with addiction. You see that with people in depression. They're often at your lowest point.
Yeah.
You think, why can't they just pick themselves up out of it? But they're kind of going through the motions of that lowness so comfortably in a way that they're the last one to realize it.
Yeah.
So that's so insightful that you were there and you can look back and know I was not in a good spot. But getting out of it at the moment, it's called stuck.
Yeah. And when you are stuck, it's like I said earlier, it's kind of hard to even begin to get out of that space, because
Right.
I've been, used to living in discomfort for a while. Like I said, for about probably around a year, just everything was, gray for me. I had things. I had a family. I had friends. I was up here. I had everything good going for me, but nothing really mattered. It was just like I woke up and just did this cycle of life that I was so used to.
Right.
And I just remember that, and one of the best people that I ever have talked to about this, my whole situation, is my mom. My mom has been one of the best free therapists I've ever had.
Okay. Now that's a role model too.
So,
that's great.
And it's good because for some people, parents can even be the hardest thing to talk to about this whole
no
thing.
doubt.
Because I've been through times where I've been scared to ask my father questions, or scared to ask my dad about something that could potentially steer me away from making a bad decision. Not to say that I made bad decisions growing up. Every kid does their
None of
things
us are perfect.
Yeah, does their things here and there. But just with the whole mental health thing, I felt like, looking back on myself as like a younger kid, I feel like it had. Dang, I just picked up all of that.
Yeah.
As a younger kid, I've realized that now it was kind of always there.
Right.
That feeling of anxiousness, or, not knowing where to turn, because as a kid, my mom tells me all the time that I was the most joyful kid, and my brother was the meanest. And my brother's younger than me, but I got, he messed around with me a little bit when I was younger, because I didn't know how to defend myself, didn't know how to stand up for myself, because I was just afraid of literally everything. I was afraid of what people thought of me physically. I was afraid that people were talking about me, at that lunch table over there, or this girl is saying this thing about me. And I started to realize that, it's okay to think that way when you think that people are talking about you like that, even if they are, and even if they're not. It's okay to think like that, because I believe that once you realize that sort of sense of anxiousness and depression is coming, I just try to motivate myself the very best way possible. So a question that I wanted to ask you is that, especially now more than ever in the last couple of years, we've seen a major increase in depression, and the mental health and all of that's been really boosting. So to be a happy, healthy person, and to kind of escape that realm of, darkness and sadness, because I know people who are going through it. I've known people who have gone through it, and everyone kind of navigates it differently. Mm-hmm. But what would you say is kind of like a really good way to kickstart that? And
No, that's a great question. Really good question. And I think your story, and I love how you speak about that comfortably, because what you say is, you had a normal life in most every respect, but you still went through it. And I was the same way. And mine ended up in a severe case, and it took me down and my whole family down in the very worst way. Once you learn some tools to get out of that, what you find is, I could have gotten out of this a little more easily, because we do have a lot of control of ourselves. Number one, there are such simple natural remedies: engagement with others, healthy engagement with others. I'm not talking about grabbing a bunch of people and taking in a bunch of substances till everybody can't see straight, because usually that deepens, that momentarily makes you forget it, and then you feel worse about yourself later. But natural remedies, like engagement with others. Studies are very clear. What you and I are doing right here, right now, what you mentioned about doing with your mother, which, by the way, I like her already, that she can do that. And friends that can provide the same thing. Engaging with other humans, studies are in positive manner. Studies are so clear that it will elevate how we feel about ourselves immediately. Mm-hmm. There are other things when I'm somewhere, if I'm on the road and I think, I'm tired, maybe I could have a drink, but I really can't, because I could put everything I have in jeopardy. I've learned that there is a short-term, simple, free remedy. I don't like how I feel at the moment, but if I take off and start walking, particularly if it's sunny outside, or even if it's cloudy and there's the ultraviolet rays are still getting through, when you walk and you get a little blood to your brain, you're out of that worst moment and you feel better. And that's a simple example. Do I think that's going to save and change everybody's life? No. But I use it to say that these little examples, we have control, as you talk about, when you recognize the feeling. And we used to think that young people and others use substances to change how they feel. For peer pressure, that was the big thing. It's peer pressure. What we know now is what I just said before, ahead of time. We try to change how we feel. So sitting here listening to you and your story, and you talk about, I was a happy-go-lucky kid. I was joyful, but there was a time as I got older, I felt some anxiety. I look back, I was depressed. Well, it's interesting, because then you're telling me about your father and his journey in sobriety, and I immediately see the parallels, like with me and my sons, where when you're talking about what you faced, that's probably what he faced as well in some degree. And I'm not putting words in his mouth. I'm just saying that's what leads us to substances in the first place. Right. I had all of those feelings, and I self-medicated with alcohol. My son William had all of those feelings, and he self-medicated first with alcohol and then daily with marijuana, and then other pills and things got introduced. And he was not known as a partier.
Right.
If anything, he was probably known as a little more square. He loved sports. He loved music. He loved people. But he was shy and he was anxious. And he probably, if anything, hid his substance use, trying to pretend like he was all mainstream. But it was really not for peer pressure, because he's hiding it from his peers. Right. The extreme use, not alcohol use, but the extreme use. But yet he was just trying to, he wasn't comfortable with himself.
Do you think he used it as like a way to cope with what was going on?
I do. He certainly, for example, was very anxious about going into social events.
Right.
And I remember telling him at some point, why do you have to drink that much or smoke that much marijuana to go into a social event? And then I thought, well, this is so ironic. I'm telling him that because he can just open his eyes and like, does he see anybody, adults or at any age, hardly going to a party without at least a drink? Mm-hmm. No. So you grow up in that culture and then you feel that way. And then it's like, oh, well, I'll do it. And your personality just takes to it more readily than others. And so where some people are going to the party and they're having 1 to 3 drinks.
Right.
And they're loosening up, and they can have a good time and quit and go home. Mm-hmm. He's moving on 3 to 13,
right?
And it doesn't stop because his personality is and his DNA is wired a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. But they were all using it for the same reason. Everybody there to change how they feel. It's just some of them could stop at 3, and some couldn't.
Do you think like with kids? So it's cool that you say that because I'm 22 years old. I'm a senior in college. You know, the alcohol and all that stuff, it's a very big thing up here. And you kind of dabbled on the peer pressure thing. And I thought that was interesting because I feel like if you're up here and you're at a party or you're at a bar and, you know, somebody, you know, you want to drink, but you don't necessarily want to drink or somebody else is trying to. And if you don't, you know, drink that beer or, you know, smoke that joint or something, you know, they're going to look at you differently and say, oh, well, that kid's not cool. You know, we don't need to be hanging out with him. And that's kind of what sets into the peer pressure.
Right.
Is that these kids, especially the younger ones nowadays, because, you know, kids who may not have done, you know, all the drinking and the drugs back in high school.
Right.
But then once they get up here, they realize that, hey, if I want to actually, you know, be able to make friends or do stuff up here, I've got to make sure I've got to do that.
That's exactly right.
And so you talk about self-control. You said that earlier. So I do say that I like to think that I've got a sharp mind and got some self-control because addiction, like my father says, it's a disease.
Yes.
And I never thought of it that way when I was younger.
Yeah, it's not weakness. It's a disease. Right. They're not dumb. They're not – it's a disease.
Yeah. And my uncle, who my mom's brother, who he spent his 21st birthday in rehab.
Wow.
And my dad, you know, he started drinking, you know, so-and-so when he was 17, 18. But my uncle, you know, he's been sober for about, I want to say like 27,
wow.
20, something like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
you got some amazing stories in your family. That's incredible.
So I did like in that writing class, when you came and spoke and 2 years ago at my IMC, maybe 205, it was my media writing class, and you came and spoke, and that's kind of
remember it
the
well.
Idea of us to speak.
Yeah.
So one of the stories I did was on my uncle, and because I always knew that his name Greg always knew Greg was kind of like what he went through, but to the extent I never really understood it because a lot of addicts, you know. I've got. It sucks to say it, but I mean, I've got friends who are addicts and who are, you know, experiencing that thing. And one of my really good friends, he's doing a lot better now. I hope he doesn't mind that I'm saying this, but I mean, it's, but you know, it's a hard thing that I think nowadays a lot of kids tend to not really look at because they're like, maybe this is a problem, but if it becomes a problem, then I can't do it anymore.
Well, that's it, and they're afraid of quitting because they literally, when you start at a young age, and my son William, you know, who was smoking marijuana every day by early in high school, I remember him telling me, when you've done this essentially when you were growing up, you're almost afraid to stop because you don't know how to do anything. He's like, I didn't know how to go to school or go to a party or go do anything without the influence. And, you know, I see so many young people. I mean, there's plenty of adults, but my specialty is young people, and males in particular, young men in particular, are like my son William, and they feel trapped that they're in a daily habit of substance use, and they know they're not happy. I'll ask them, look, you do whatever you want to do. It's your life. But are you happy? Do you feel joy? And they're like, no. Do you want to do something different? Yes. But if you ask them, which that actually is the definition of addiction, you keep going back to something every day that has an adverse effect that's not what you want, but you keep going back to it every day. For some reason, they all have this picture in their mind of being addicted means if you go an hour without it, you're breaking down in the shakes. But the definition of it is like you don't want this, but you keep doing it day after day anyway. And so what they'll tell me is just what you said. They know they're suffering. They know they don't want it, but they don't consider themselves a so-called being addicted. And so they're afraid of even trying anything different because they have no picture of what's on the other side. And my William would say that. He's like, I don't know how to do this. And I can relate. I mean, I remember going to parties early in high school when I'd started drinking, and I remember when I stopped drinking as an adult, it was time to go to a party. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know about that because I'd never been to a party since middle school when it was like pin the tail on the donkey and balloons with a dance, just kind of a party. Yeah. I'd never been to a party without alcohol essentially in my entire life. I didn't know how. And I think that's how they view, I don't want to stop because how am I going to go to class and go to the fraternity house or go, I don't want to.
Right.
But they're not happy.
Yeah. And that's just it just kind of brings you down when you think about stuff like that. It's like that.
Well, that's why we have these conversations.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised the studies show that when people hear this kind of conversation, and I have them a lot, and that's why I love to do this kind of thing and appreciate people like you having the conversation.
Yeah.
There will be somebody that watches this who will think, you mean I can decide and I can go get support and I can get out of this rut? And they will. And it happens every time I have this conversation. It happens every time I have this conversation. And it will happen from this. Somebody will. And it's like you said at the beginning of this. The conversation is the first step, and it's what unlocks it,
Yeah. I wanted to talk about William for a minute, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I know he's your...
no, I love talking about my dear, sweet late William.
So, and for those of y'all who don't know, Dear William was published how long?
Dear William was published in November of 2021.
Right. So, because around the time you came, it was around the time it was coming out.
Yep.
So Dear William, it's a memoir about, well, I'll let you talk. I'm not very avid with books, but I know a lot about yours, and Dear William is just kind of about a letter. I mean, the title is Dear William, so it's about kind of like a memoir to his son and kind of about battling with addiction. And I wanted to kind of understand about writing about something that was probably the most impactful moment of your life.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
My mom, you know how mothers are. They're like, God, I wouldn't know what to do if I lost a kid.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm young. I'm not even thought about the whole Chuck kid thing yet. But going through that process of losing a kid, I really can't even imagine.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And especially, I think it was so hard even to believe it was real because William was in the Honors College at the University of Mississippi. He was in the Croft Institute. He ran the 400 hurdles on the Ole Miss track team and made it all the way to the SEC Outdoor Track and Field Championships.
Wow.
In the hardest, some people think the 400 hurdles in college is a brutal event. Yeah. Brutal event. And he was so tough to be able to, you got to come out at a full sprint all the way around the track, hitting those. He's had kind of short legs to be a 400 hurdler and go hit those hurdles hard at full speed. And he was so tough to be able to do that. But then when I find him dead, I think, how does this even happen? And that's really what I wrote my book, Dear William, about, because, I find my son dead of this accidental overdose, who was my treasure in life and who had all this talent and was such a sweet young man. I mean, and also such a good heart. I mean, he was active in his youth group at church all the way through school. He was just a sweet, tender-hearted human. You think, how does something so bad happen to somebody so good? And that's really why I wrote the book, because it was like when I found him dead, you think, as you talk about like how hard it is for a parent, you think, well, this is the end of me. Mm-hmm. It's not just the end of him, it's the end of me, because that's my child. It's the end of my family. But what I remember in finding him is not just how did this happen to him, but I knew that there was a family link, and I knew it was bigger because I had my own journey, and my daughter had her journey in eating disorder, my other son with an accidental overdose. And I remember thinking, it's not even fair to pin it all on this one young man, my son William, and just let the story stop there, because people want to do that. It's so tragic. You lost your son, and move on. But I felt like I had an obligation to look back at myself and my life to our whole family, is like, how did this happen? Because it's not just as simple as the dawn of the fentanyl era and he died of an overdose. Sure, but there are a whole lot of other people out there who aren't, don't have fentanyl in their system and aren't self-medicating on marijuana and alcohol every day and so forth. So I had to look back as what happened? What happened? And that really is what Dear William is about, is looking into, just as you're talking about your uncle and your father, that's different individuals, but some brought together by marriage within a family. But it's one family unit that people have had this common experience. And here's what we know statistically. What we know statistically is that when you talk about having a father in recovery and an uncle in recovery, they will their success will support one another. Mm-hmm. And you can have the same thing in a father and son environment. So I needed to tell the story of how this happened to William, to our family, but I had the need also to tell the story of how we got out of it, how we weren't going to let the death of our son break us, how we weren't going to let the addiction others of us faced break us, Yeah. And that was the story to tell. And it really is one, it's heavy, but it's one ultimately of hope, because we can have and keep the joy that we want and deserve, both as individuals and also as family members.
Yeah. Wow. So with that, and with, when you did lose your son, and you said prior you were battling with your own things, and then your son, and then your daughter as well. When that kind of stuff happens to people, I would think that some people would just learn and just give up and keel over and not even begin to.
And a lot do, sadly.
Yeah, and it does, and it is sad to hear that a lot of people, that once that kind of thing does happen to them, they, like I said earlier, they don't want to go out and try to be and get better and do better. So what I wanted to know is, when all of that was happening, when you lost your son and doing with your own thing, what kind of kept you to say, I know I need to keep going, and I know that I need to, this story. And another thing is, how did you know, and this story could be beneficial to others, potentially millions of people who are going through the exact same thing. So it's how did you kind of get into the process of getting into writing the book? And because it had to have been difficult writing a book
it was.
about the most tragic moment of your life.
No doubt. It was. Yeah, I mean, I'm writing about moments in Dear William, like finding my son William dead. I'm writing about a Christmas day where I'm at a Waffle House contemplating going to get on a plane to spend Christmas Day with another woman who was not my wife. And I did get on that plane, because that's pitifully what addiction looks like. It was not easy to write, but the two things I think to answer your question, that's a really good one. Number one, honestly, and this now people that have known me my whole life, they probably think this sounds funny, but faith was a big part of it. Mm-hmm. It's not something I really talked about when I was younger. Honestly, even though I taught a young adult Sunday school class for some years, it's not really something I understood before.
Right.
I just claimed it because I thought I was supposed to. But when you've been on your knees and crawled across the floor and you have nothing left, that humility can really help you understand that you actually can't take one more single breath on this earth if you can't just surrender yourself and believe in a higher power. And there's a lot of studies on human happiness and how we find joy. And actually, every study shows that we are happier when we believe in something bigger than ourselves. And for me, I really had an awakening with that, and I think that did a couple of things. That gave me the strength to realize that I have made all these mistakes and I have lost so much, but there is grace and hope and forgiveness out there. And then also that faith, I think, helped me to understand once I did get my family back and we got back on our feet, I understood that really the only way faith and human hope has existed through all this time is through storytelling, mm-hmm. just like we're doing here. That's why I appreciate when you told me you did the podcast. I was like, I like that. I like that very much. Storytelling is the key to the human heart. Mm-hmm. It could even be about sports. We love sports. It unlocks emotions and excitement.
Yeah.
Right? Storytelling is the key that really makes us humans tick, and it can unlock us. And so when I saw how my family responded, I realized that I'd had a role in my family's decline, and I did. Because they looked up to me. So when I'm suffering, you'll take them all down with you. Mm-hmm. And when I got back up on my feet, I saw how that benefited my family. And guess what? My family, like a rising tide, rose in accord. And so then that faith piece helped me get there. And then it helped me to understand that storytelling is the art of human happiness and joy. And I can take this beyond just my family if I take this story about our family and how we got on our feet to others. And it hasn't let me down. It has unlocked joy. And let me tell you, I'm the greatest beneficiary.
Right.
People say, how have you done that? And I go, sure, it's hard. It's hard. But I've benefited the most. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel selfish saying that. I've helped so many people who come back and tell me, and I shed tears for them. And I find joy in that. But also, I shed tears for myself and my family because I'm not shy to tell you that as you make it about others, you benefit.
Yeah.
They should teach that more in school. If you make it about others, you benefit the most. Mm-hmm. And I'd been out there trying to do it my whole life about me.
Yeah.
Didn't work. And so that really is it.
So a quote that I like to say that I've heard before is, if you help people get what they want, eventually you can have anything you want.
Anything.
And
everything.
One of my tabs on here is helping other people. Like you said, you've helped tons of people with the whole mental health situation. And I wanted to talk about what you've done with the university up at Ole Miss, because I go to South Rec all the time. I go work out there all the time. Nice. And every time I'm walking in, I look to the left, and I see William's name on the door, the William Magee Center.
Right.
And for people who don't know, who may go to school here and don't know about it, I kind of wanted you to help explain kind of what that is and how you help all these other. Because another thing I had on here is that kids in school, kids in college especially, struggle a lot. Especially freshmen.
I think the struggle is so much more around anxiety, depression, and not sure who they are where. Mm-hmm. In college is more severe than most parents and people could ever imagine. Yeah. I run into it, because you've been there. Mm-hmm. And I think most would be shocked.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of understood, why do you think it is that kids do go through what they go through when they come up here, when they experience that feeling of anxiousness and depression, and why do you think that is? And then essentially, what is the first step to kind of take to get out of that?
Great question. There's a study that would just shock a lot of parents, and it's that 87% of college students will feel very lonely, not a little, will feel very lonely at some point during their college career. Now, that's a shocking statement because the story that's told to college students is you will go have the time of your life.
Right.
And history does actually, the human history for each individual will bear that out, because they will look back on college once they're through the process and consider it a more special growth time of their life, and even fun. Also a lot of fun. But the fact that a study says 87% of college students will feel very lonely at some point during their college career says a lot, because they can go join student organizations. They're doing so much, and you have all these people around you, and it's hard for parents to understand, how can you feel so alone? But it's almost like that first time of going off to camp when you're a little kid, and you're small, and you get in that bed and you think like, I need to go home. Or the first time you spend the night out and you're like, I need to go home.
I've never related to anything more than that one, the way you just said.
You remember that feeling.
Absolutely.
I know this was supposed to be fun, but I need to go home. And that's what the college student can feel. They can be totally surrounded by people, but they're trying to make their place, because they can look around. It feels like all these people know each other. Or you can be one of the ones that supposedly knows everybody, and then you got your whole other set of issues. Mm-hmm. And you're not sure who you are. You're not sure who your place is. And it comes fast. You show up and you're just thinking about moving to the dorm, and all of a sudden it's like wham. And in the classes, and then you sign up for a pledgeship, or
it just
you
hits you all at once. And you
it's
don't really
coming.
know what to do. Yeah.
It's coming.
Oh, yeah.
And you're trying to right size with the friends you have, and here's the key thing that I find. Sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
We see college students suffering from sleep deprivation, and the top symptoms of that are anxiety, depression, and often closely mimics the symptoms of ADHD. And so you get all this going, this kind of turbocharged atmosphere, a lack of sleep, a self-doubt. Who am I? Where's my place? And naturally, for all of us, it's going to yield feelings of being alone. And so studies show that it could be any college campus anywhere. On any college campus, students are prone to try a new substance within about 3 weeks of arriving on campus. Wow. And so, see, that often is attributed to peer pressure, because they're doing it and getting it from a friend or trying to fit into a friend, but it's all about how they feel.
Right.
They feel alone, and so they're trying to attach to something. So if they arrived, say, using alcohol and marijuana on a regular basis, they will introduce pills or cocaine or whatever else potentially within 3 weeks of arriving on a college campus. Or if they were just doing alcohol, they might introduce marijuana. And then what happens is they often have feelings of guilt around that, because they're going through rapid change, and is like, is this who I am? Is this what I'm meant to do? And it's all a natural growth process, and it's all a natural process of learning what you want and who you are. And that is part of college. But the notion, I tell parents who are trying to cheerlead their students into having fun, like, but you have everything. I mean, just remember, you wanted this. That cheerleading does no good. Yeah. You more need to ask them, how are you? Mm-hmm. What can I do for you? That's really all you need to ask them. Yeah. That's all you need to do, is just be there for them and ask them how they were doing, what you can do for them. What do they need? Do you need to talk to a counselor? Can I help you get one?
Mm-hmm. I think the how are you doing question is something that is asked a lot. Like, obviously, like when you meet somebody, like, oh, how are you doing? 95% of the time, they say, I'm good.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
I'm
good.
great. I'm good.
Like, but then you really think about it, and then that person, when is asked that question, they say, I'm good, but deep down they think, I know that I'm not.
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so that's kind of goes back into the point of admitting that you aren't.
Yes.
And that there is, a better way to not feel like that. Because
and one of the best ways I tell everybody, I mean, I see remarkable results with students in just go get baseline counseling. Talk therapy is one of the oldest. It's not even medication. Talk therapy is one of the oldest remedies to feeling better. And I'm getting it right now talking to you. and so that's one of the first things I do when parents or students call me and they go, look, I think my child is struggling, or the student says, I just don't feel right. I'm like, there's 10 things I can tell you. The first thing I'm going to say is take a walk. Second thing I'm going to say is make a phone call and just go get some counseling, because how can you go wrong with that? Mm-hmm. You can't. You will learn more about yourself, and you will be happier as a result.
Yeah. So it's funny you talk about counseling and stuff like that. So when I was about, I want to say probably around 9th or 10th grade, when I was really kind of going, when the whole kind of phase that I was going through was starting, I was in the car with my mother, and I see my mom. She's like me. She's, ADD, ADHD. So she's got to put sticky notes in her car to remind herself of things so she doesn't forget. And so one day I was in the car with her, and I look at one of her sticky notes, and it says, call Connor's therapist. And I took the sticky note off the card. I looked at it, and I was like, what is this? And she was like, well, your dad and I think that it would be good for you to go kind of talk to somebody. And I immediately became defensive.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't need that.
Yeah. Are you saying something? You're thinking too much is wrong with me.
Right. I was like, I would look at my mom. I was like, you actually think that there's something wrong with me?
Right.
I was like, I don't need any of that. And then I fought my parents on it for a long time about the whole therapy thing. And then I eventually decided to do it. And I haven't been to a session in a while, but just because I've learned so much.
Yeah,
and all
sure.
that.
Well, that's the thing. It doesn't have to be forever.
Right.
And there might be some point in your life where you go back.
Yeah. And I started going, and like you said, you learn. It's crazy how you can learn a lot about yourself with somebody who doesn't know who you are at all. Like my therapist, he, did some of these exercises with me during my sessions, and it just really blew me away. Like the fact that I used to never be an emotional person. Like I used to never be a cry. I'm not a cry type person, but cry with somebody that I've never even met before.
Yeah. Right.
And he just did this session with me, and after the end of it, I just kind of sat there, and after I was wiped the tears off my face, just took that deep breath, and I was like, that was just I can't even find right now. I can't even find the word to express it, just because it's something that you go into these and learn about these parts about yourself that you never really knew about.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. You would have promised yourself and anybody before you walk in, but you walk out going, oh.
Mm-hmm. I talked what I said when I was younger, how I was just kind of a frightened kid. I was just scared of a lot, and that was kind of one of the main things that I learned during doing therapy, was learning that when I was a kid, that to this day I still don't know why I was like that, why I was so afraid of a lot of things, but whenever I talk about it, I talked to my mom one time, and I was like, I really wish that I could just have this conversation with a 12 or 13-year-old version of myself. Because one thing that I would tell him is that I would just say, hey, it's normal, it's everything is going to be all right. I would tell him that, because that kid, didn't know how to handle all that kind of stuff and didn't know how to, reach out or do anything. And when you're that young, you don't know what to do.
No.
And you
don't
don't
even know what's happening.
You don't even know it's there.
No.
And that kind of whole thing is something that, like, and you wish, people say this all the time, like, what I wish I could do to go back and do things differently. I'm sure you've
my
thought that
list
as well.
is so long.
Yeah.
But I make peace with the fact that I can't. All I can do is learn and go forward.
That's exactly
Honestly, if I didn't make peace with that, I wouldn't be nearly as happy as I was because you're just always looking back.
And I like to think that sometimes that these trials and tragedies that we go through, I think that they're supposed to kind of define the kind of person that you are, because when you go through, like you losing a son, like here's an example for me. I lost, this bracelet that I'm wearing. One of my oldest friends, I'm sure you heard of Walker Fielder. I've known him. I knew him ever since I was in kindergarten. He's one of my oldest friends. And he was killed. I want to say, February of this, or beginning of this year, maybe. And that whole process, he died I think the day after his birthday.
Yeah.
So my dad called me at about, you get the worst calls either at late at night
or early in the morning.
Yep. So my dad calls me at 6:30 on a Sunday morning, and I'm just so confused on why I'm getting this. I thought I was something with my grandmother or, maybe my dad's Parkinson's, whatever it was. And he was like, Walker Fielder was killed early this morning. And after he said that, I just kind of hung up the phone. I didn't really acknowledge him or anything because I didn't really know how to react to something like that, especially with a kid who he's like everything that you said about William Walker was just like that.
No, I've heard
such a well-liked kid, and I'm from Jackson, and he's from Jackson as well. So that whole Jackson community kind of it brought everyone. Like I grew up with all of those kids that from JA and the guys that
That's right.
And but I eventually didn't go. I left JA when I was in first grade, and
but y'all all knew each other.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that whole thing kind of brought everybody together, and I hadn't been with this group of people for a long time since I moved schools, and then when he died, it kind of brought me a little bit closer to them, especially one of my best friends who I'm now seeing like on a regular basis, and those kind of those moments that you think that everything is just the worst and like how can it possibly get any worse. I think those are the kind of moments that really define a character and a person.
I think they are, and we can't have joy without resilience and having, sadly, part of crawling across the floor and feeling that pain is part of it, and it is how diamonds are made. It's under some real pressure and I will tell you, I'm happier. People say, what happened to you and your family is terrible. I say, it is so tragic. But what also you must know is don't feel sorry for us because we are incredibly happy. We miss our William every day, but my children that have come through recovery, myself, my wife, my family, we're happier than we've ever been. And we've never known joy like this. And that's how you get there. And it doesn't mean it will happen easy. It doesn't mean any of us will live forever. It doesn't mean our children or our parents or, we humans, there's a frailty of this life, but there is also a richness and a reward for the resilience and the strength that you keep going with, and it pays great dividends.
Yeah. I wanted to do a little dabble on the topic that is life, because I keep bringing up quotes because I like quotes. I hear them here and there, and they just resonate with me. And one of them, this was in a movie, I think, from a while back, and he goes, "The only thing that is inevitable in life is death."
Right.
Like no one's ever cheated it. No one's ever gotten around it. There's everyone comes and goes. That's the way life goes. And a lot of people kind of have a hard time kind of resonating that and understanding that.
And it's fear. They're afraid of it.
Yeah.
You know?
And the one thing that to me is that I try in my life right now, the main thing that I'm trying to do is that I want to give to more people than I take.
Yeah.
And I don't have, like a so-called message, but I'm
You might have more one
Yeah.
than you think sitting here listening on this other chair, but yeah.
But I think that it's supposed, like everyone's supposed to go through that kind of thing, because I feel like that if you don't even experience any type of anything like that, then you won't know how to actually appreciate how it is to feel like good.
Maya Angelou used to say something to the effect of, you can't get anywhere unless you've crawled across the floor to get there. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I wanted to be a good writer, and I was a decent writer, but I became a better writer when I'd been through this and I began to write with truth and honesty. And yeah, I mean, look, we humans are shaped by the journey, and the journey is often hard, but it is also often exhilarating and rewarding beyond what we could ever dream, Yeah.
Another thing that I like to think about is that I think the one thing that makes life so special is that you've only got one.
Right.
And that it's so important to do whatever it is you want to do in your life.
And people live all these fears. Everybody's afraid they're not going to have enough money. They're afraid of this, and they do what we live all their lives a lot of times based on fear. And then people die, and people just throw their stuff away. Yeah. Like we do have to learn to live a little bit while we're here, and that can help us free us. Like I took a risk to go do this work I'm doing, and a lot of people thought I was crazy. I had a great vice president job at a big media company, and I quit it to move to Oxford to do a lot of this work, and a lot of people thought I was crazy. But I was like, I live once. I have one life, as you say. I mean, what am I waiting for till I'm dead? Then what am I going to do? I'm gone, and people won't even remember us. And so you have to trust your heart, and I think faith and give you the courage to go chase some things and take a few calculated risks, I think, because you can't take it with you, and nobody does.
Walk by faith and not by sight.
There you go.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about is your new book that was published probably like
early August. Things have changed. Yeah.
So, and I read a description. I would love to read it. I read a description on it, and you said in the beginning how it's kind of like a message for parents.
Yes.
To help their kids as they're growing, to kind of help foresee stuff.
To know what to look out for. To know how to better talk to them, because things have changed. And parents say to me, but I know what's going on, because I was young, and I mean, I was out there. I go, you don't know what's going on. It has changed so much, so fast. I mean, the smartphone is now the primary way that teens buy and sell drugs. I mean, it's so I tell parents, you don't know what's going on, and also how you should talk to your teens and college students. We know, because the research tells us how, and I talk to a lot of students and they tell us how. It's open-ended questions. Stop telling them what they should do and how they should feel. And so this book is very much about that. It's about when your teen, if you're afraid they're going to struggle, how you can help ahead of time, or if they are, what you can do. And it's a guidebook. It's like I say, it's like what to expect when you're expecting that parents get when they're having a baby. But now they're like in college or high school, and you're like, well, what do I do now? Because it's getting a little wonky. Well, this is the guidebook for that.
Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of parents should read and to look into, because the college times can be very struggling for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so for people to kind of know that there is always greener pasture, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. it's something that a lot of kids need to know about. And I
Right.
think that whenever I do get to that stage of having my own children, that I will be learning a lot of that, of what you've said today and kind of imprinting it on them. But I really appreciate you taking
you
the
too.
time and for letting us use your
Yeah.
new office space.
I'm
And
glad to be your first guest back after a break. It's an honor.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, good stuff.
But that's about it. That's all I've got. I want to thank you all as well for watching. I know I'm very inconsistent, but I promise I'm working on it. But that's about it. Leighton behind the camera, make sure to thank him. I'm gonna leave in the when it's up. So today's Wednesday, so I mean today's Wednesday. Yeah, so it'll be up. I'm gonna try to get it up tomorrow on Thursday. I'm gonna put a link description. A link in the description I'll put one for Dear William and for the new book as well. So if you guys want to check it out, the link will be in the description. And yeah, thank you guys so much, and I'll see y'all next week.